On October 13th, 1307, an entire order of warrior monks collapsed in a single morning, and the reason was a name whispered under torture: Baphomet. Legends claim the Knights Templar worshipped a demonic idol, but the historical record reveals something far more calculated and far more dangerous. The word Baphomet appears in confessions, chronicles, and secret trials, yet none of the testimonies describe the same thing. That inconsistency isn't an error. It's the first clue to a hidden doctrine buried beneath Jerusalem, encrypted inside a single name that has outlived kings, crusades, and inquisitions. Once we decode what Baphomet really means, the entire history of Western esotericism stops being a collection of symbols and becomes a system with a terrifying purpose. Let's begin. In 1119, 9 French knights arrived in Jerusalem with a mission that made no sense. They told King Baldwin II they wanted to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. The king granted them headquarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built directly on top of the ruins of Solomon's Temple. And then these 9 knights, Hugues de Payan, Godfrey de Saint-Omer, André de Montbard, and 6 others, did something strange. For 9 years, they protected no pilgrims. They recruited no members. They fought no battles. They vanished from public records as if they had ceased to exist. But they hadn't ceased to exist. They were digging. Muslim sources from the period confirm it. Ibn al-Athir, writing in the early 1300s, states, "A group of Frankish knights established themselves in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, claiming to protect pilgrims. But Muslims working in the area reported they were digging beneath the foundations." British archaeologists in the 1860s discovered these tunnels. Medieval excavations descending through layers of Ottoman, Crusader, Islamic, Byzantine, Roman, and Herodian construction, all the way down to bedrock. Down to the original foundations laid by Solomon nearly 2,000 years before the Templars arrived. These weren't random tunnels. They were systematic, precise, as if the diggers knew exactly where to go, as if they had maps or texts telling them what to look for. What were they looking for? To understand that, we need to know what Solomon's temple actually was. The Bible presents it as a house of worship. But there's another tradition, preserved in texts the church later declared heretical. The Testament of Solomon, dated between the 1st and 5th centuries, describes how King Solomon commanded 72 demons using a ring inscribed with the seal of God. He forced these demons to build his temple using supernatural knowledge. And when the temple was complete, Solomon didn't release them. He bound them in brass vessels and sealed them in vaults beneath the temple. But the Testament describes something else Solomon sealed below. Quote, "Books containing the secret of the name written on plates of gold." The secret of the name. In Kabbalistic tradition, this refers to the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, but not just as letters. The secret involves the correct pronunciation, the proper vowel points, the precise state of consciousness required to invoke the name's power. With this knowledge, a human being could perform what appeared to be miracles. The Copper Scroll, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, provides a treasure map of what was hidden before the Babylonians destroyed the first temple in 586 BCE. It lists 64 locations containing gold, silver, and sacred vessels. But it also mentions books, vessels, objects whose purposes aren't specified. The Emek Hamelech, a Hebrew text from 1648 claiming to preserve older traditions, states explicitly that Levite priests hid the Ark of the Covenant, the tablets of law, Aaron's rod, and most importantly, books containing secret knowledge in chambers beneath the temple. This is what waited in the darkness when 9 Templars began digging in 1119. For 9 years they excavated. For 9 years they descended into chambers sealed for over 1,000 years. For 9 years they found things, read things, learned things, and in 1129 everything changed. The Templars emerged from obscurity and attended the Council of Troy. They received official papal recognition. Bernard of Clairvaux wrote their formal rule. Within years, 9 unknown knights had transformed into a military order with hundreds of members, vast wealth, and political power rivaling kingdoms. What changed? They had found something beneath Jerusalem, something that gave them knowledge and confidence that terrified both church and crown. And they encoded what they found in a single word: Baphomet. Moving forward, we need to examine the accusations themselves, because hidden in the contradictory confessions extracted under torture is the key to understanding what Baphomet actually meant. On October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the simultaneous arrest of every Templar in his kingdom. The charges were designed to shock: heresy, denying Christ, spitting on the cross, obscene rituals during initiation, and at the center of it all, worship of a mysterious idol called Baphomet. The timing of the arrests was deliberate. Friday the 13th, a date that would forever after be considered unlucky, branded into European consciousness by this act of betrayal. Philip was drowning in debt to the Templars. Their banking system controlled European finance. Their wealth exceeded that of most kingdoms, and most dangerous of all, they operated with independence that suggested they considered themselves above royal and even papal authority. Philip needed to destroy them and seize their wealth. Pope Clement V, essentially Philip's puppet, provided the religious justification. The Inquisition went to work. The methods were refined through centuries of extracting heresy from Cathars, Waldensians, and other enemies of orthodoxy. The strappado, where victims hung by their wrists, tied behind their backs until shoulders dislocated. The rack, stretching bodies until joints separated. Feet roasted over coals until bones showed through charred flesh. And the question, repeated endlessly, tell us about Baphomet. The confessions came, but they were strange, contradictory, almost hallucinatory in their inconsistency. Brother Jean Taillefer described a bearded head with skin like tarnished silver that seemed to glow in the darkness of the chapter house. Brother Rainier de Lachon spoke of a skull adorned with jewels, positioned between 2 candles, which knights kissed during secret ceremonies while murmuring words in an unknown language. Brother Hugh de Perraud testified about a great cat, black as void, that appeared during initiations and whose eyes reflected flames that weren't there. Others described something that sounded more like an experience than an object, a presence that descended during secret rituals, filling the chamber with pressure that made ears ring and hearts race. Some said it appeared as a column of smoke taking vaguely humanoid form. Some swore it was a head with 3 faces, young, mature, and ancient, rotating slowly to gaze upon each initiate. Some claimed it wasn't visible at all, but made itself known through a voice, speaking directly into the mind. The Inquisitors, working within medieval demonology, could only interpret this through one lens: devil worship. But here's what's crucial. If the Templars truly worshipped a physical idol in their secret ceremonies, why couldn't they agree on what it looked like? Why did some describe a head, others a skull, others a cat, others an invisible presence? The answer is that Baphomet wasn't a thing. It was a teaching, a doctrine, a body of knowledge that was shown to initiates at different levels in different forms depending on their readiness to understand. Several Templars, even under torture, used identical strange phrases. They called Baphomet our salvation and the source of our prosperity. They claimed it revealed the error of the Church and showed what Christ truly taught before his words were corrupted. This doesn't sound like devil worship. This sounds like Gnosticism, the ancient heresy teaching that the Church itself was the work of a false god, that Christ came to reveal secret knowledge rather than to die for sins, that salvation comes through gnosis rather than faith and obedience. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, initially confessed under torture. Most men would. The human body has limits, and the Inquisition had centuries of experience finding them. But then, de Molay did something remarkable. As he was being paraded before the public as an example of repentant heresy, he recanted everything. In front of assembled crowds, he proclaimed the Templars innocent and declared his confessions had been extracted through unbearable suffering. This sealed his fate. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny were burned alive on a slow fire on an island in the Seine River. As flames consumed him, de Molay's voice carried across the water. He cursed King Philip and Pope Clement, summoning them to meet him before God's throne within a year to answer for their crimes. Pope Clement died exactly 1 month later in terrible agony. King Philip died 7 months after that, when his horse threw him and his skull cracked on stone. Medieval observers didn't consider this coincidence. They whispered that de Molay's curse had power, that he had invoked forces that answered even from beyond death. But here's the question that should haunt us. Why did de Molay recant? He knew it meant the worst death imaginable. If he had maintained his false confession, he might have lived out his days in prison. Instead, he chose the fire. What was he protecting? What secret was so vital that even the certainty of burning alive couldn't make him betray it? The answer lies in the word itself, Baphomet. Because this word, when properly decoded, reveals everything the Templars died to protect. Now, we arrive at the heart of the mystery. The word Baphomet contains multiple levels of meaning, each revealing deeper truths about what the Templars actually discovered. The word Baphomet first appears in public records during the Templar trials. But where did this word come from? What does it actually mean? Scholars and occultists have proposed numerous interpretations over the centuries. Each interpretation reveals a different layer of the teaching. Let's examine the most significant. The most important discovery came from Dr. Hugh Schoenfield, a British biblical scholar who worked on translating the Dead Sea Scrolls. Schoenfield knew that ancient Hebrew texts sometimes employed a substitution cipher called Atbash. This cipher appears in the Bible itself, particularly in the book of Jeremiah, where Sheshach is a coded reference to Babylon. The Atbash cipher works by reversing the Hebrew alphabet. The first letter, Aleph, becomes the last letter, Tav. The second letter, Bet, becomes the second to last, Shin, and so on through the entire alphabet. It's a simple cipher, but effective for encoding words you don't want outsiders to understand. Schoenfield applied the Atbash cipher to Baphomet, spelled in Hebrew letters, Bet, Peh, Vav, Mem, Tav. When you reverse these through Atbash, the result is Shin, Vav, Peh, Yod, Aleph, Sophia, the Greek word for wisdom. But not just any wisdom, divine wisdom, feminine wisdom, the very principle that Gnostic texts describe as emanating from the true God and falling into matter. In Gnostic cosmology, Sophia is both a cosmic force and a symbol of the soul's journey. She was an eon, a divine emanation from the Pleroma, the realm of fullness, the true God beyond the false creator of this material world. Sophia desired to know the Father directly, without her consort. This independent act caused her to fall from the Pleroma into the Kenoma, emptiness, the void, what would become the material universe. In her fall, Sophia gave birth to the Demiurge, the false god who would create the physical cosmos as a prison for divine sparks of consciousness. The Demiurge, ignorant of the true God beyond him, arrogantly declared, "I am God, and there is no other." This Demiurge is Yahweh, the jealous God of the Old Testament, who demands blood sacrifice and brutal conquest. The goal of Gnosticism is to rescue Sophia, both the cosmic Sophia trapped in matter and the Sophia within each human soul, and return her to the Pleroma, to divine fullness. If the Templars encoded Sophia as Baphomet using the Atbash cipher, they were signaling something profound. They were teaching that their true doctrine concerned divine wisdom, the feminine principle of creation, the Gnostic path of return to the source, knowledge that the Church had declared heretical and tried to destroy. This would explain their later veneration of Black Madonna figures, their unusual incorporation of feminine divine imagery in an age of rigid patriarchy, their respect for Mary Magdalene as a figure of supreme spiritual authority. The Atbash transformation of Baphomet into Sophia wasn't just wordplay. It was the key to understanding their entire secret teaching. But there are other interpretations of the word Baphomet, each revealing additional layers. Some scholars have suggested Baphomet derives from Greek, Baphometeos, meaning baptism of wisdom or baptism of Metis. Metis was the Greek goddess of wisdom and cunning thought, the first wife of Zeus, whom he swallowed to prevent her from bearing a son who would overthrow him. This interpretation suggests the Templars performed an actual initiation ceremony, a baptism into wisdom that transformed consciousness, a ritual transmission of gnosis that altered how the initiate perceived reality itself. The simplest interpretation connects Baphomet to Mahomet, the medieval Latin version of Muhammad. Critics accused the Templars of converting to Islam during their time in the East. This accusation was almost certainly false in the literal sense. The Templars remained publicly Christian. But there's truth beneath the surface. The Templars had extensive contact with Sufi mystics. Sufism teaches that beneath the literal interpretation of the Quran lies a hidden, esoteric meaning. That direct experience of God is possible through systematic spiritual practice. That religious forms are vehicles for truth, not truth itself. If the Templars recognized Sufism as a valid path to divine knowledge, they might have developed respect for Muhammad as an enlightened teacher while maintaining their Christian identity. In an age of absolute religious tribalism, this kind of spiritual universalism would have seemed like conversion to the enemy. Some researchers propose an Egyptian origin, Baphomet, meaning the soul of Thoth manifested. Thoth was the Egyptian god of wisdom, writing, and magic. The Greeks identified him with Hermes, calling him Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great. Hermeticism, the magical and philosophical tradition attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, was experiencing a revival in the Islamic world during the Crusades. Arabic scholars in Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus were translating and studying Hermetic texts. The famous Grimoire, called the Picatrix, a massive compilation of astrological magic, was assembled in Arabic during this period, drawing heavily on Hermetic sources. If the Templars encountered Hermetic texts during their excavations or through contact with Muslim scholars, Baphomet would encode this entire tradition of ancient Egyptian wisdom. Eliphas Levi, the 19th century occultist who created the most famous image of Baphomet, explicitly connected the name to the goat of Mendes. Mendes was a city in the Nile Delta where Egyptians worshipped Banib-Diadet, a ram-headed god associated with fertility and the soul. The Greeks, conflating rams and goats, called him the goat of Mendes and associated him with Pan, their god of wild nature and ecstatic sexuality. Levi deliberately chose this connection. He was linking Baphomet to the life force itself, to procreative energy, to libido in its cosmic sense, the drive that animates all existence. In Kabbalistic numerology, gematria assigns numerical values to Hebrew letters. Words with the same numerical sum are considered related in essence. Some Kabbalists have calculated the gematria of Baphomet and found connections to phrases describing the hidden name of God, the path of wisdom, and the process of return to divine source. While specific calculations vary depending on spelling, the consistent theme is that Baphomet relates to hidden knowledge of God's true nature. What emerges from all these interpretations is a pattern. Baphomet wasn't a demon to worship. It was a code word for a teaching that synthesized divine wisdom, Sophia initiatic transformation, baptism of wisdom, universal mysticism, recognition of truth in multiple traditions, ancient magical knowledge, Hermeticism from Egypt, life force and creative power, Pan and the goat of Mendes, secret knowledge of God, Kabbalistic gnosis. The word was deliberately chosen to be multivalent, to carry different meanings for initiates at different levels of understanding. A new recruit might be told Baphomet was a relic or protective talisman. An intermediate initiate would learn it represented the wisdom traditions encountered in the East. A full initiate understood it as the complete synthesis of Gnostic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Sufi teachings. This is why confessions under torture were so contradictory. The Templars weren't describing a physical object. They were trying to explain a multi-layered teaching to inquisitors who could only comprehend idol worship. The bearded head, the skull, the cat, the demon with three faces. These were attempts to translate abstract knowledge into concrete images. The Inquisition thought they were dealing with devil worship. They had no idea they were trying to suppress a sophisticated mystery school that had synthesized esoteric wisdom from 3 continents. But the code goes deeper still. Because when Eliphas Levi finally created his visual representation of Baphomet in 1856, he encoded the entire Western esoteric tradition into a single, unforgettable image. We now arrive at the moment when centuries of hidden transmission crystallized into visual form. When the Baphomet Code was finally made visible for anyone with eyes to see. Eliphas Levi was born Alphonse Louis Constant in Paris in 1810, the son of a shoemaker. Brilliant but poor, he entered seminary school and seemed destined for priesthood. But Constant's mind was too strange, too hungry for the church. He was expelled for his radical views. He threw himself into socialist movements, was imprisoned for his politics, and eventually dedicated himself to what he called the revival of magic. In 1854, Levi published Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie, Dogma and Ritual of High Magic. This work systematically connected Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, and ceremonial magic into a unified system. But it was in his 1856 work, Histoire de la Magie, History of Magic, that Levi included an illustration that would become the most recognizable occult image in history. His depiction of Baphomet, the Sabbatic goat. This image is so densely packed with symbolism that it functions as a visual encyclopedia of Western esotericism. Every detail is intentional. Every element encodes specific teachings. Let's decode it systematically. The figure sits cross-legged in meditation, immediately signaling that this concerns inner work, contemplation, spiritual practice, rather than external worship. The head is that of a goat, specifically a bearded goat. This connects to Pan, the Greek god of nature and wild vitality. But deeper still, to Banib-Jedit, the Egyptian Ba, soul of the Lord of Jedit, whom Greeks called the Goat of Mendes. In ancient mystery religions, the goat represented life force, vitality, procreative power. In Gnostic thought, it symbolized the divine soul trapped in matter, possessing potential for both degradation and transcendence, depending on how that energy is directed. Between the horns sits a flaming torch. This is the light of consciousness, the illumination that elevates beast into divinity. It's the fire Prometheus stole from the gods, the light of gnosis that dispels ignorance. The torch emerges from a pentagram positioned with single point upward. This is crucial. An upright pentagram represents spirit ruling over the four elements of matter: fire, water, air, earth. It symbolizes human consciousness aspiring toward the divine, the light of awareness governing base nature. The inverted pentagram, by contrast, represents spirit subjugated to matter, consciousness imprisoned by animal desires. Levi deliberately shows Baphomet with the upright pentagram, declaring this is a symbol of mastery, elevation, sovereignty over the material plane. Now we reach the most controversial element. The figure is androgynous: female breasts, masculine features, and a large phallus partially concealed by the caduceus of Hermes, two serpents intertwining around a staff. This androgyny is the absolute core of the Baphomet doctrine. In Kabbalistic cosmology, Adam Kadmon, the primordial human, was androgynous before being divided into male and female. The goal of spiritual work is restoring that primordial wholeness. In alchemical tradition, the great work culminates in the chemical wedding, the union of opposites represented by the hermaphrodite or rebus. In Gnostic texts, the highest divine emanations are both male and female or beyond gender entirely, because duality exists only in lower, fallen realms. Baphomet represents the state of spiritual completion, the human who has integrated masculine and feminine aspects, active and passive qualities, solar and lunar natures. The masculine represents directed will, active force, solar consciousness. The feminine represents receptive wisdom, magnetic power, lunar consciousness. Most humans are fragmented, identifying solely with one pole, incomplete, and seeking completion through external union. The illuminated being has achieved union internally, becoming whole, self-sufficient in the deepest spiritual sense. On the right arm, pointing upward toward a white crescent moon, is written SOLVE, dissolve. On the left arm, pointing downward toward a black crescent moon, is written COAGULA, coagulate. These are the fundamental operations of alchemy, but they describe far more than chemistry. Solvit coagula is the rhythm of all transformation. Break down the old form, crystallize the new, die to who you were. Be reborn as who you're becoming. Dissolve conditioned identity, coagulate true self. This is the death and resurrection that all genuine initiation involves. The placement on the arms is significant, the right ascending, the left descending. This represents the Hermetic principle as above, so below, the continuous exchange between spirit and matter, heaven and earth, macrocosm and microcosm. The wings are those of a bat or demon. In Neoplatonic philosophy, demons serve as intermediaries between divine and material realms. They translate spiritual intention into material manifestation. The wings declare that Baphomet exists in this intermediate realm, the magical point where transformation becomes possible. The figure's breast bears the caduceus of Hermes, two serpents intertwined around a central staff. This is one of the most ancient esoteric symbols. In Kundalini Yoga, two subtle channels called Ida and Pingala spiral around the central Sushumna channel, perfectly matching the caduceus pattern. When these forces balance through spiritual practice, Kundalini energy rises through Sushumna, activating higher consciousness. The caduceus declares that Baphomet represents this balanced, activated state. Levi himself explained his creation explicitly. He wrote that Baphomet represents the equilibrium of opposites, the intelligence formulated by our fathers, and the absolute in symbolic form. He stated, "The goat represents the powers of generation, and this is also the symbol of perfect being, which is the substance of all beings." In other words, Baphomet is a visual representation of the completed great work, the human who has integrated all opposites, balanced all forces, achieved gnosis while remaining grounded in material existence. But Levi went further. He explicitly connected his Baphomet to the Knights Templar. He wrote, "The Templars had two doctrines, one concealed and reserved for leaders, being that of Johannism, the other public, being Roman Catholic doctrine. Johannism is the primitive Christianity, the secret doctrine of John the Baptist and Jesus Christ, known only to the elect. This Johannine Christianity Levi describes is essentially Gnosticism, the teaching that Christ came to reveal gnosis, secret knowledge that liberates consciousness from material imprisonment. According to Levi, the Templars encountered this authentic teaching in the East, recognized it as truth beneath all religious forms, and encoded it in the symbol of Baphomet. Whether Levi's historical claims were accurate matters less than what he accomplished. He synthesized centuries of occult transmission into a coherent system and gave it visual form so potent it would define Western esotericism for the next 150 years. The image became a teaching machine, a visual grimoire conveying complex initiatic knowledge to anyone capable of reading symbolic language. The response was predictable. Christian critics saw the goat head and pentagram and screamed Satan. They pointed to the image as proof that occultism was devil worship. They completely missed the upright pentagram, the symbolism of integration and balance, the explicit representations of higher consciousness. Or perhaps they understood perfectly well. Perhaps that's precisely why they screamed. Because this image threatened to make the esoteric accessible, to reveal hidden doctrine to anyone willing to look beyond surface appearances. Within occult circles, the reaction was opposite. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1888, incorporated Baphomet into their system of correspondences and grade teachings. Aleister Crowley added his own layers, connecting Baphomet to the Devil card of Tarot and the God Pan, interpreting it as the creative life force and radical individual liberty. The image became central to virtually every Western magical tradition that emerged after Levi. But with wider dissemination came distortion. As we enter the final section of this investigation, we must confront how the Baphomet symbol has been inverted and corrupted in the modern era. And through these distortions, paradoxically, the original doctrine's power becomes even more apparent. After Levi published his image in 1856, the symbol began migrating through Western esotericism, accumulating interpretations, inspiring both devotion and rejection. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn integrated Baphomet with precision. For Golden Dawn initiates, including the poet William Butler Yeats and the young Aleister Crowley, Baphomet corresponded to specific paths on the Kabbalistic tree of life, specific tarot cards, specific forces that had to be balanced in the magician's psyche. Their interpretation remained faithful to Levi. Baphomet as equilibrium, integration of opposites, the great work made visible. Then came Aleister Crowley, and everything became darker, stranger, more transgressive. Crowley styled himself the Great Beast, 666, and took perverse joy in violating every Victorian taboo. Where Levi had been scholarly and careful, Crowley was deliberately provocative. In his system of Thelema, whose central axiom is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," Baphomet represents the true will, unbound from moral constraints. Crowley wrote, "The devil is the creative energy in its most material form. He represents the Godhead manifesting in matter." For Crowley, what Christianity called evil, sexuality, aggression, chaotic natural forces, was actually divine creative power expressing itself in material form. This was still esoteric doctrine, still part of the initiatic stream, but it pushed boundaries in ways that would have consequences. Because in 1966, Anton LaVey founded the Church of Satan in San Francisco, and LaVey did something that fundamentally transformed Baphomet's meaning. He inverted it. LaVey created the sigil of Baphomet, Levi's goat head placed inside an inverted pentagram, single point down, 2 points up, with Hebrew letters spelling Leviathan in the 5 points. This inversion completely changed the symbolism. Where Levi's upright pentagram represented spirit ruling matter, LaVey's inverted pentagram represented spirit subjugated to matter, the human embracing animal nature rather than transcending it. LaVeyan Satanism is essentially materialistic atheism performing as dark religion. LaVey didn't actually believe in a literal Satan. He used satanic imagery to represent opposition to Christian morality and celebration of material success and carnal pleasure. This stripped away all genuine esoteric content, the androgyny representing integration, the solve et coagula of transformation, the ascent toward illumination. It reduced Baphomet to a middle finger aimed at Christianity. This is the Baphomet that entered mass consciousness through heavy metal album covers and horror films. This version fueled the satanic panic of the 1980s, when fundamentalists became convinced Satanists were performing ritual abuse and recruiting children. The panic was largely baseless, but it cemented in popular imagination. Baphomet equals Satan equals evil. This distorted version has almost nothing to do with what the Templars discovered beneath Jerusalem or what Levi synthesized from esoteric tradition. It's Christian demonology inverted for shock value. But while LaVey was distorting Baphomet in one direction, other movements were developing its authentic potential. Modern Wicca and neo-paganism recognized in Baphomet a representation of the horned god, the masculine principle of fertility, wildness, natural law that complements the goddess. For Wiccans, Baphomet represents the sacredness of sexuality, cycles of death and rebirth in nature, divine presence in the material world rather than separate from it. This interpretation recovers something close to the original doctrine: integration of spirit and matter, recognition that body and desire aren't sinful obstacles but manifestations of the divine. Most recently, the Satanic Temple has used Baphomet in political activism, erecting statues next to 10 Commandments monuments, arguing for religious pluralism and separation of church and state. Their Baphomet explicitly represents compassion, empathy, and rational inquiry against religious dogmatism. This political use circles back to something like the original Templar context. The Templars were destroyed precisely because their doctrine threatened ecclesiastical authority. The idea of direct divine knowledge accessible outside church mediation was politically intolerable. The Satanic Temple's use of Baphomet to challenge Christian hegemony echoes this transgressive quality. The symbol still threatens established religious power. So what is the final truth? After tracing this symbol from torture chambers through Victorian occultism to modern courtrooms, what can we actually say about the Baphomet Code that the Templars tried to hide for 700 years? The doctrine is this: reality is fundamentally dual, spirit and matter, light and dark, masculine and feminine, active and passive. These dualities aren't separate warring forces, but complementary polarities arising from unified source and ultimately requiring reintegration. The material world isn't evil or illusory, but a manifestation of the divine. The body with its desires isn't a sinful obstacle, but the vehicle through which spiritual work must be performed. The path to illumination requires integrating these opposites rather than choosing one and rejecting the other. This integration cannot be achieved through belief, dogma, or obedience to external authority. It requires direct experience, inner work, transformation of consciousness through practices that dissolve conditioned identity and allow recognition of true nature. All religious and mystical traditions describe this same essential process using different symbol systems. The gods and demons of mythology are best understood as personifications of psychological and cosmic forces that can be worked with consciously once their nature is understood. The goal isn't escaping the material world, but achieving equilibrium, becoming fully human by realizing divine nature while remaining grounded in physical existence, mastering forces that unconsciously drive most people through life. This doctrine synthesizes Gnosticism's recognition that material existence traps consciousness with Hermeticism's teaching that the material world is necessary divine manifestation. It unites Kabbalah's map of emanation and ascent with alchemy's technology of transformation. It incorporates Sufi mysticism's direct experiential approach with recognition of the sacred in embodiment. This is what the Templars encountered during excavations beneath Jerusalem, in contact with Eastern mystical traditions, in synthesis of knowledge from multiple sources. This is what they encoded in the word Baphomet and protected through layers of secrecy and initiation. This is what they were willing to die to protect, because they understood that once this knowledge becomes widespread, once people realize they don't need intermediaries to access the divine, the entire structure of religious authority collapses. The church that tortured and burned the Templars wasn't paranoid. They were correct to fear this doctrine. Because if people can achieve direct knowledge of the divine, if truth is accessible through personal experience rather than scriptural interpretation, if the body and its energies are sacred rather than sinful, then what function does the church serve? What justifies the priests, the tithes, the elaborate hierarchy, the claim to exclusive salvific power? The same applies to any authoritarian system. The Baphomet doctrine is inherently anarchistic. It places ultimate authority in the developed consciousness of each individual rather than in external institutions. It teaches self-sovereignty, self-transformation, self-deification. These are dangerous ideas to any system based on obedience and control. Eliphas Levi understood this when he created his image. He encoded the entire doctrine in visual form, making it accessible to anyone willing to look beyond surface appearances and learn symbolic language. The upright pentagram declares sovereignty. The androgyny declares integration. The torch declares illumination from within. The solve et coagula declares continuous transformation. The wings declare the magical realm where spirit and matter interact. Every element teaches some aspect of the complete doctrine. The symbol has been inverted and distorted in modern times. But these distortions are diagnostic, showing what aspects of complete humanity the culture fails to integrate. LaVey's materialism reveals the shadow of capitalism. The Satanic Panic revealed Christian culture's terror of sexuality and bodily autonomy. Each distortion shows what the culture represses, but for those with eyes to see, the original doctrine remains accessible, encoded in the symbol, waiting in texts both ancient and modern, preserved in initiatic orders and increasingly available to solitary practitioners willing to do difficult inner work. The Baphomet Code has been hiding in plain sight since Levi published his illustration in 1856, visible to anyone, comprehensible only to those who have developed consciousness to decode it. The Templars died protecting this knowledge, believing it worth ultimate sacrifice. Were they right? Consider this. A doctrine that threatened medieval ecclesiastical authority still threatens modern institutions. A symbol that caused violent reactions 800 years ago still generates intense controversy today. Knowledge that people were willing to be tortured to death rather than reveal might indeed be worth something. The choice is yours. You can see Baphomet as a demon, a rebellion, a political statement, or a psychological archetype. Or you can see it as what it actually is, a map, a key, a visual grimoire encoding a complete system of spiritual transformation that unifies Western esotericism's fragmented traditions. You can dismiss it as superstition and continue unchanged, or you can recognize it as an invitation to the great work, the dissolution and recrystallization of consciousness itself. The Templars hid this knowledge because they understood it's dangerous. Dangerous because it's powerful, because it works, because once genuinely understood and applied, it transforms the person who receives it. They were right to be careful. They were right to encode it in symbols. They were right to protect it with their lives. And now, 700 years later, here it is, available to anyone with internet access and willingness to look. The question is, what will you do with it? So, my friends, wherever you are in the world, in the light or in the shadows, think for yourselves. Research for yourselves. Question everything, including this investigation. The greatest trick keepers of hidden knowledge ever pulled was making people believe the knowledge didn't exist. The second greatest trick was making people believe it was too dangerous or too difficult to pursue. It exists. It's dangerous precisely because it works. And the path is difficult, yes, but it's open to anyone willing to walk it. If you found this investigation valuable, consider giving it a like and sharing it with others who might be ready for this knowledge. Until next time, may you find what you're looking for. Or better yet, may you find what you weren't looking for but desperately needed. The path is marked, the symbols are visible, the work awaits.